Welcome to Warblog. Today we're going to look at the battle for Sumy. It's sort of the first one that I've put together as a sort of a full proper scenario because it's a bit more involved. I've changed the sort of colour of the Ukrainian units to their colours, and so this is all sort of happening at the moment. I'm not going to sort of look at, well, maybe I could look at some of the tweets. This is Sumi, the sort of whatnot thing. So if we just sort of do that again, just to see what's happening. So this is what I'm looking at. So this is sort of views of the Russian forces entering Sumy. This, well, it's just a bunch of things. Oh, look, there's my game. It's probably only coming up because of me. As you can see, it gets nothing. I've not seen this one yet. What is it? It's all in sort of foreign language. So obviously lots of things being blown up. So the question is, I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and the question is, how did they get blown up? See, we don't get told this. Was it a drone strike on part of the Ukrainians? I mean, are they Ukrainian or are they Russian vehicles? I'm presuming they're Russian because that seems to be the way that Twitter is working. Sort of residents blocking things. We've seen that. See, this gives us the impression that there's drones. So maybe I should give the Ukrainians some drones. I haven't yet, but when I get back into the scenario, I'll start explaining what's going on and what I'm doing. This one says lots of abandoned vehicles, but they don't look blown up. So they might have run out of fuel or things of that nature. So more of the same. I know which one I'm sort of trying to get to. It's basically a big pothole. I didn't really want to sort of spend my video looking at Twitter. The same thing. Everyone's posting the same thing, and nothing really happens in that. This is a good one. Well, an interesting one. Does your mum know that you're killing Ukrainians? So presumably on a billboard, which I sort of thought was interesting. So footage of the damage in the city of Sumy and the Russian attacks. So this is basically, what's happening. I'm not going to play the sound because I don't think I have sound recorded anyway. But clearly, this is a lot of rubble. So this is just the beginning of the rubble making business. I think that a lot of what's on Twitter is sort of trying to suggest that the stoic people of Ukraine can resist the evil of Putin's army. But you don't. Whatever made that, there's no sort of standing back and waving flowers that's going to stop it. I mean, this is the serious side of it. Here we have more rubble. Toothpaste. Oh, right, yeah, sort of putting a burning thing into a tank seems like a good idea. This is an interesting tweet, actually, because it's a bunch of Indian people in eastern Ukraine that can't get out and are sort of lamenting the 1,200 kilometer journey from where they are to the nearest extraction point. And I was thinking, well, how long would it take to walk 1,200 kilometers? I mean, that would be, you know, a serious endeavor. And would you do it? I mean, personally, I would set out, because I think in a day you could probably do 30 or 40 kilometers, and you would just keep doing it. And hopefully within a week you would you'd be able to manage something in a week, and with some good fortune you might get some lifts or a train or something. This is really sort of got me thinking, really. I mean, this is like a 6-year-old girl, and she basically dies. So they're trying to sort of resuscitate her there. They bring her in from an ambulance early, where they're similarly trying to do that. And then they bring in this bloke with no underpants on, and I think that's the girl's mum. So they're all sitting around trying to save her, and obviously she's died. So, and then they have this picture of sort of, you know, closing the eyes, and then the empty room. So that is I mean, that's what's happening, and I don't think we should not look at it when we're sort of, and then we get this sort of stuff, which I think is, you know, it's interesting, but, you know, to think that you can do anything, I don't know. I think it's a conundrum, really, as to whether or not you resist and bring more rubble and more. You know, there was one video where someone was there's a school burnt down, and the reason it was burnt down is because there was a Ukrainian AFV, armored fighting vehicle, just a sort of mechanized unit that had been positioned there. And obviously they targeted it, and the whole school was burnt down, and some woman's crying over that. And so, you know, it's all happening, but I'm obviously not getting to the bit that I want to get to. I've not seen that one. Oh, there's someone playing a musical instrument. I saw that. So this is the one I was looking at. Now that puddle looks like it's in the middle of what was a road. I mean, that is one big explosion. So again, we're getting sort of some clues as to, you know, their approach, and no amount of joining the Ukrainian militia in resistance is going to stop something that big happening. You know, no amount of even these videos of people kneeling in front of tanks as though this is the way to do it, I think is irresponsible to some extent, because it's only going to be a matter of time before these tank drivers, A, don't see you, and B, just run you over anyway. You know, so videos of people with their legs blown off. And the thing is, a lot of this is all as it was in Syria, in Iraq, and Afghanistan, and Libya. But I think it's fair to sort of accept that it's a different context, and the context is, you know, A, it's more Western, B, it's more sort of conventional, in the sense that, you know, this is not an insurgent activity. This is sort of more of a direct war, you know, a different caliber, really. So that's that. I don't want to sort of go too far into that. So here we've got essentially that sort of, so somewhere in there they're going to blow things up, and maybe that junction was somewhere in here or somewhere in here. So now what I've done, I haven't sort of covered everything that I wanted to, but I started thinking, well, what are they doing? So what I've decided, these are just going to be the militia units. So these are the militia units. They're not going to act as insurgents. I have got insurgent units, but they're going to be more sort of fully trained military personnel that are acting in an insurgent capacity. So that would be where people are prepared to do sort of operations, you know, in conjunction with other elements and support, whereas the militias are more sort of, well, they're just really going to just go and find somewhere, sit there and throw petrol bombs and things, but to sort of not so much balance that out, but to represent the more important element of these sort of smaller units. I've put in these anti-tank units. I've been using these before anyway, in Syria and all those places, and the context there again is the same here. It's probably only, 3 or 4 people, maybe 5 people, maybe 10. It's not an entire company as the sort of insignia represents, but I think that when you start to look at the reasons why we've got all these vehicles on the roads, you can sort of say, well, because we've got these anti-tank things, but we've also got artillery, and we've only got one here. Maybe I thought I'd put a few more. I might sort of double that up a bit. So the only thing that's sort of missing from maybe some of my thoughts is maybe some Ukrainian drones. Now we've got the Russian drones. So if you look down on the order of battle, we've got some Russia drones, but we've also got some engineering companies. I've seen these both destroyed and bridges that have been put up. And so we've got they are flicking through. We've got some engineers in there. I think there's 2 in there. So we've got some units here, and units here. So in the first instance, I think what you've got to be sort of thinking is, well, what are you going to do? Just sort of drive through here. Now, what I've also put in are some these engineering works. So this is, I can't never remember what I call them. They're basically, it's not just barbed wire, it's obstacles. I saw a video just the other day yesterday, and they had put, basically they'd welded almost the archetypal tank trap made out of steel, and big piles of tires, and they'd stopped a Russian column. You could see the Russian column quite a bit down the road. And I thought, well, that is sort of, I think, fairly, I don't want to call it pathetic effort, but it's somewhat pathetic, and I mean, I'll explain why, not in an assaulting sense, because basically you haven't stopped the Russian column. They're just sitting there thinking about whether they want to kill everyone there, or whether they can go around, or what the nature of this is. They've got lots of little tyre spikes. Well, these are tanks, so the armoured fighting vehicles are just going to go straight over those. They've got tyres, and the tyres are just going to be moved out of the way. The point I'm getting to is, and I'm not trying to advise, but I would have thought that they would just, if they're going to do something like that, if they're going to start putting these up, they just get their excavators out, their JCBs, and they just start digging up the earth and digging. And this is what they did all over Syria. I mean, they had a not much easier time of it because it's sand and very loose soil, and so they, entire sort of, towns encircled with earthworks. And I think that would be, to some extent, what I'd be looking for if you're going to defend something like Sumy. Of course, I don't want to be too sort of, I don't know, sort of authoritative on it, just passing comment, But I think that, if you were to be doing that, then you would be getting all the rubble and digging down for tank traps, and then using sort of the whatever you bought out of that for the barricade, and actually doing that not just once, but every sort of corner, just building up. I mean, this is some of the videos that from Syria and Iraq, they were just basically, there was just big piles of rubble, and there are going to be more and more big piles of rubble as the bombing goes on. But you can just sort of digging these things. So essentially, we've got the introduction of engineering units, and I thought that I did some. I know that I did some Ukrainian engineering units just for that purpose, but I've forgotten to put them on the map. So we've also got some air defence, because I figured that they've got some air defence in there. So let's just recap what we've got. We've got the anti-tank and militia units. So the militias are sort of these people that have decided to take up guns. They're not up to much. The potency is with the anti-tank, which, if we mix them in with that, we can sort of say, well, this is a small dynamic unit in the city, which is going to cause these people a problem. If they come in here, they get caught up in these earthworks. These anti-tank units are a range of 3, 1, 2, 3, so they're just out of range at the moment. But I've also put these in there, Insurgents. Now, I mean, I wouldn't say if you're new to this because I don't expect a lot of viewers. But just to recap, the Insurgents are sort of more, they go out on a special operation. Quite often it's lay an IED or to a suicide run in a car loaded with explosives. But they also do other things like maybe they'll basically go in behind enemy lines and blow up something. So these insurgent units can attack this tank unit, and if they're successful, they can actually cause quite a lot of damage. But the thing is, I think there's some rules that you can only do that against something with a maximum force of 5. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the rules really, but I put the insurgents in there because they are the ones that sort of carry out these discrete but potentially devastating attacks on particular units. But they take sort of about 5 or 6 turns to recover. So they're available at the moment, as you possibly I should say available. Maybe I've forgotten to put that in there, but they'll be available, and then once they've done that, they run away and have to wait 6 turns, and that basically represents them planning and plotting for their next operation, so to speak. It could be that they're just doing a sniper raid on sort of a commanding officer, those sorts of things. So we've got the militia units. We haven't got any insurgents, but we've got the anti-tank, and we haven't got any irregulars. I haven't put any irregulars in here. So we've got insurgents, militia units, and anti-tank. But also put some air defense in there. That will counter possibly any air power. In this instance, they've got some drones. And then we've got in here in the middle, it's conventional forces. So we've got infantry, artillery, and mechanized. We've got some mechanized over here, and that's pretty much it really. So, and the thing is, some of the things to sort of point out on here, it's not, I mean, I'm trying to sort of balance this up and sort of thinking, well, hang on, what's happening and how does this reflect that? So we've got a much smaller urban area than the other ones, Kyiv and Kiev, and Kharkov, whatever it is, but we haven't got sort of massive lines. It's not like the other one, if you watched a previous video where it's just stuffed full. So in theory they could sort of come in and drive, but the thing is, what's going to happen if they come in, say, down here and manage to get into that hex because there's nothing in there? They suddenly can become very vulnerable to these anti-tank units, and so this raises the question, so to speak, of what are they going to do about these anti-tank units? And I think we've sort of seen, well, also, what are they going to do about this artillery unit? Now, the artillery unit is where? It's right in the centre. And that was what I think was what that big puddle we saw was. Obviously, they've decided that whatever's there, they don't want it there anymore. And whatever that munition was, it created a huge crater. I don't know anything about the munitions. I never really sort of care too much to know. All I know is that that's a big hole. And so it could be that there was an ammunition dump there or something. But the thing is, this artillery is a threat already. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So they're just outside of range. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I didn't do that purposely, but they're just out of range. So you've got to think, well, before they start sort of running in to get into. So, for example, if you were to drive down here, as soon as you get, say, to here, suppose this unit gets to there, it will receive artillery fire. And so that's possibly one of the reasons that these vehicles, Russian vehicles, are being stopped on the roadsides, because they're receiving artillery fire. And, so that's another sort of aspect of, what are the answers to the pictures that we're seeing. What's the background, what's the causes, what actually happened? I mean, it's all one thing seeing something, for example, I saw one of these tanks. I mean, all these tanks look pretty modern to me, but all it was a turret. I mean, it was well entrenched into the tarmac, like it had gone up in the air probably 50 feet and landed. And there's got to be a story behind that as to exactly how that happened. It wasn't sort of like a couple of militia people shooting some AK-47s at it and kneeling before it. That was something else. And it could be that the tank itself blew up from the ammunition it's got inside, but it probably more likely it was caught by some sort of high explosive sort of precision ordnance, like from a drone or something like that. But the thing is, so we're looking at sort of, what those sort of pictures, what stories are behind those pictures. So on the Russian side, we've obviously got some tanks and some mechanized units, and we've got some engineers in here, so they might go in there and sort of remove these earthworks so we can run straight through there. They might come in there and, we might, the Ukrainians, if I put the engineers in, because I think I have just forgotten to put the engineers in for the Ukrainians, they could sit there and blow this bridge up. So you can sort of say, well, what are there? There's bridges, I think, there's bridges somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where the bridges are. I think that there's probably a bridge or something around here. I don't know. But so you've got the engineers, but also you've got these rockets. Now I've given them sort of, these were really just designed to reflect sort of more of the higher power rockets, and I think we've got the Grad systems. But they're now also talking about these thermoballistic weapons that they've had around for a long time, because I've seen them before, and they basically suck up all the oxygen in the air, and they're pretty dangerous, and sort of cook everything in a sort of a 600 meter, which is 0.6 of a kilometer sort of diameter. And if I put something in to reflect that, that'll be a lot higher than that. These are sort of more the Grads, but those Grads, they just seem pretty ominous. So we've got a fair chunk of what I think might be there, in the sense that we can start to sort of model what's happening and play it, so to speak. So obviously we've got our drones. So in the first instance, you might sort of think, well, how would we approach this? Well, I think the most important thing really is to get rid of this artillery. So let's just... unfortunately, my computer has actually... it's lost the ability to drag. It's just my computer, because I leave things open for weeks, and I've noticed today that I can't drag a new tab down, so I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm probably not even going to be able to move. So I've lost the ability to sort of drag these things momentarily, but it doesn't matter, because I don't really want to sort of go on talking forever. So I mean, it does work otherwise ordinarily. So 22 minutes is a fair sort of conversation, and I don't want to be an orator for the war, so to speak, and sort of, but I am following it, and I'm sort of getting a bit more of a sense for what's happening, and maybe how to sort of position the Ukrainian forces so that it just doesn't look stupid, and you can then start to sort of consider what is happening. I had a lot of thoughts, but I can never remember what they are, so I can't remember what they were. But I just think that things are going to change. I can't remember. There were some really important things that I sort of thought, well, this is really significant or important. I'll talk about that, and then I can't remember. But I think that. I think what we're getting in the media is a lot of misinformation. I know I said that before, and I think a lot of it is quite dangerous misinformation, suggesting that foreigners go to the Ukraine to fight for freedom. And I think there's a dangerous misconception about what's actually happening, because Putin isn't. And I saw some sort of they were like polls. What do you think Putin wants? And none of them really reflected what I think he wants. And essentially, it seems that politics, war is an extension of politics, and he's been negotiating for something. Now, I don't quite know exactly what he's been negotiating for, because you don't see a lot of coverage on it. But I think that one of the aspects, and the main aspect, is the demilitarization, or the reduction of the military build-up that the Ukraine had been going through, plus things associated with genocide and things, massacres in Odessa, and what's happening in Donetsk and Luhansk, etc. And I think that basically, what we're looking at is the failure of negotiation and politics and the extension of that into war. And I think that I think that people are just accepting this sort of bizarre concept that Putin is just mad and he wants to annex the Ukraine. I don't think he wants to do that, but I think I said this in the previous video that I think he wants to basically demilitarize things. And so, I mean, I've saw some stats, and he's like destroyed 1,024 military objectives or something like that. So these are like air bases, radar stations, etc. And they're not focusing. The media are not focusing on that. They're just focusing on Putin's sort of apparent desire to conquer Kiev. Now, he didn't do anything yesterday, according to the Institute of, and I think this is a safe thing to look at this moment. But this is I think this is the one from yesterday. It says, Russian forces likely conducted an operational pause on Kiev on the 26th and 27th, and obviously it's the 28th today. But really, did he? Because, I did this scenario, actually, the road to Zafiria, wherever that is. Didn't read that. But basically, I think to some extent they do look as though they definitely want to maybe take Kiev, but I can't see why. I think their focus is on destroying all of these military objectives, and there isn't really anything in here that I can find on that. If I go back here, so this is conflict update 10, but this is yesterday's one, I think. Let's just see whether this says anything sort of we haven't read. So this is yesterday. So he put his nuclear strategic missile forces on whatever deterrent, whatever he did. Russian forces likely conducted an operational pause on Kiev. So I think we've sort of read this. Operational pause, on the broad advance between Chernihiv and Kharkiv. But the thing is, they're not. I mean, they seem to be spreading inland. I don't really want to do this, but let's go for it. So this is where I just got that map. If you look at this, they're going inland, and you can't see them so much here. But there was things like tanks spotted here, tanks spotted there. For example, here, Russian army used chocolate factory as base. So they're sort of, they seem to be what I might describe as blitzkrieging through and getting some of these locations, and they're sort of pausing around here. Now, I don't think that this map is as accurate as it might be, because a lot of it is basically based on tweets, and I think that there's a limit on what's coming through on tweets. For example, I know that a lot of this has been sort of taken, and other maps showed a sort of more of a drive along there, to sort of cut off all these forces from the sort of the Donbass area. But going back to that sort of question, I don't think really it's sort of an operational pause because they can't do it. I just think they don't want to go in and do those things. But I know I sort of said that all before, and I don't want to sort of keep repeating myself really. I'm not sure what I'll have a look at on that. But so that's that really. I don't really know what more to say other than I'm sort of spending quite a lot of time just looking at Twitter, and it's the same stuff. There doesn't seem to be a lot of new stuff coming through. I still think that it's going to be over quite quickly, and I think this is something that I wanted to say from yesterday, from the other video I did, was you see what what I'm picking up on it is that it seems that this is an operation. It's not an invasion of a country. I mean, I know a lot of people would sort of probably argue that because they can't see the difference. But what I'm saying is, if you compare it to what the Israelis did in the Lebanon, they just, after they got frustrated with being bombed by rockets from Lebanon and against Gaza, they basically just went in to both of these regions with all their tanks and all their armor, all their personnel, bombing everything, blowing everything up, and then they came back out. They did this in they did this in Gaza a couple of times, 3 or 4 times, and I can remember one time when the big news was that the tank commanders, they couldn't put their heads out of the tanks because pretty soon they would get shot, and they were losing tank commanders left, right, and centre because the people, the Palestinians were, or the people in Gaza, I can't remember who these people are, but they were shooting them. And and I think a lot of the headlines were, Israelis losing tanks, Israelis losing commanders, Israelis suffering heavy losses. And I think we're getting a lot of that with the Russians. But I think if you were to look at it from that point of view, this is some kind of operation in the similar context to what Israel did in Lebanon and in Gaza. They went in and then came back out. Now, you've got other contexts as well. For example, there's the Turkish buffer zone along the Kurdish region. They went in there to protect their people and to create a buffer zone. And when they went in to fight the Kurds, I think it was, initially, there was a lot of alarmist reports relating to the large number of tank losses. They lost like 30 or 40 tanks or something silly, and it was like really embarrassing, and Erdogan would be, it would be his downfall because he's just losing all his armor and all that sort of stuff. But the thing is, these things come and go, and it's gone. But Turkey is still there in the northern Syria, controlling, that sort of buffer zone, and it's so complicated. I never really understand what's going on, but they're still fighting, and there's still daily sort of exchanges between one faction or another. I keep thinking they should really pay more attention and do some of this, but unless it's a sort of what I call a kinetic action, a large movement of a front line. I don't tend to really cover up too much because it's just so static. So all the sort of skirmishes I tend to sort of avoid, but sometimes I do it just because it keeps up sort of a point of reference as to what's happening. Other things that I've been thinking about are I think it's the M4 highway through Idlib, I think it is. And there was a lot of effort to open that up, and every time they sort of freed it up, they were the Hayat Sham units would then basically come in and sit on the road and put checkpoints in, and so the whole idea of this whole notion of keeping roads open is in its own right quite fraught, and I think that's one thing that the Russians are going to have to sort of contend with, keeping these lines open, keeping these roads open, and things of that nature. But I think there's a lot of sort of comparisons and sort of things that you can sort of look at. And with regards to the one I was talking about before, it was I think it's Donbass. Basically, the Russians went into Donbass, and this was years and years ago, I think it was, and that was where they lost all their tanks to basically partisans or militia units that were using satchel charges, and basically they would disable the tank, and once they disabled it, it's just the age-old adage of it being a stationary pillbox, a lot easier to destroy. And again, I think that's why they're not really going to spend a lot of time in Kiev. Let's just have a quick look at the 2 other scenarios that I did, because I didn't do a video on them. So I did these 3 after that last one. So we got the this Militia or whatever it is. And again, I just use token units, so I'm still just sort of thinking about it. But this is an interesting one. It just represents their sort of, their forward thrust. But this cuts off the east from the west, and this is a big river is distinctive feature throughout the middle of the Ukraine, and they could be cutting the entire country in half. The road to Koplansk. This is an interesting one. I did actually have a little bit of an extra toy with adding things in there. So I added some mines, these. I didn't put any engineering units in. But what you've got down here essentially is what I was trying to sort of put together was, because they're coming down here and they're basically up to about there, but they're following this road. It's clear they're following this road. So I can maybe come back and put some irregulars in there. But the point here is that you're going to end up with a convoy. So we're going to end up with these massive columns of Russian troops coming down this road, which will be easy picking for the irregulars. And if I put the anti-tank units in, because I only made them today and I did this scenario yesterday, but this whole scenario in my mind's eye was about running these things all down this road and the problems with maintaining a road. So these are actually sort of there to frustrate this road being open. It's got mines and it's got earthworks along the way. So, once you've got these sorts of things and you've got units, there's some artillery in there, you start finding out that these units are not allowed to run along the road. They're actually being pulled off the road to engage in combat, slowing them down. So harassing the roads is going to be, a big part of it all, really. And this one was, it took ages. And I don't like it when it takes ages because I don't really want spending too long. But this is actually sort of an extension to this one, which is described as sort of fairly ugly and not particularly useful. But they actually have advanced. They've probably taken these 2 or 3 hexes, but it wouldn't be not so much fun. But I don't think there's much to be gained trying to take these 3 hexes. So I've zoomed in based on the South Front article on here, and I overlaid the 2 maps, and this is sort of the before as it is, and then this is sort of, they didn't quite get to these places, but they're sort of down there, sort of like that. I don't think they got there either. They're sort of more like that. And so you sort of think, well, how did they break the line? Because it's exactly the same sort of formation. But of course you've got all these Russian forces, so this is just rockets. Now from there they can probably do it, but you'd probably want to deploy them somewhere. So basically you've got all these grad rockets. So in theory what you do is you just blow up one of these units until it's gone and just move in there. Blow up one of these units till it's gone, move in there, and then basically just break through this line. So it's not difficult to conceive how that's done. But there's obviously a lot of drones that come in, and then so you've got all your rockets, and then you've got all these drones. I just put in obviously overkill, and then you've got on turn 2 you've got 2 armored units, 2 mechanized units, and they'll basically do the exploiting. So on turn 2 you get 2 armored, 2 mechanized units, and they'll come along, come through the gap that you've made, and start taking up all of this stuff, with this stuff sort of taking up all the extra space. One of the reasons that this line has collapsed is because they're coming up from the rear, and so they've just fled. They've just left their defensive lines. I saw some videos of it, which is sort of quite interesting. But this is the Donetsk advance down there, the Donbass sort of area. So that's pretty much it, really. I'm keeping an eye on things, just because I sort of feel, it's sort of, what I was trying to say, what I'm trying to say is that it's preoccupying me. I can't not think about it. I sort of think, right, okay, well, I've done that map and I'll do something else now. And then you find yourself just looking at Twitter again and sort of looking for some bit of news, or then going to the BBC or South Front or the Institute for the Study of War, or just looking at Google and just finding out what people are saying. And I think that, obviously I come to the conclusion there's 2 sorts of people. There are people that are aware of, well, obviously lots of people, but there are people that are aware of what's happening and are sort of fretting over it, worrying about it, and then there's probably another bunch of people that are just wondering, just don't know about it. Then there are probably still quite a few people that still don't really know where the Ukraine is. They probably heard it because it's all over the newspapers, but above and beyond that, they're probably still watching their reality TV, watching the football, and getting on with their daily lives. What I'm saying is, I think there's a lot of people in the West that still really couldn't really care less about what's happening in the Ukraine, for good or worse. I'm not criticising that. I'm just saying that I'm pretty sure that most people probably don't care. It's just another one of these news headlines that they'll soon probably get quite bored with or used to, etc. But I think there's a lot of people that are sort of, especially the Ukrainians. And the thing is, I try not, every time I sort of think, oh, well, maybe poor Ukrainians, every time I think, I always think about, well, it wasn't really quite like that in the Middle East, in Syria. It was sort of, the sentiment was slightly different. And I don't want to criticize people for how they felt in that situation or in this situation. But it does seem that I think that there is a difference. You get a greater sense of loss because you can appreciate and you can relate to it a little more. Some of these pictures of, say, the young women who are sort of heavily made up, they look like Instagram stars. They look like sort of people that have spent a lot of time buying things, buying cosmetics and going to salons and things that you might be able to relate to. People that probably, quite a lot of the videos that you see on Twitter are from what sound like quite young, maybe upwardly mobile men. I don't know what their jobs are, but they're in a flat, they sound young, sort of gazing out their window, and obviously they're speaking in Russian, so you don't know what they're saying. And obviously this sort of stuff was coming out of the Middle East, but to a lesser extent. I don't think it, because I think, well, I don't want to get too much into sort of the comparison, really. I just think that you suddenly start to sort of, you can hear in the tone of their voice, because you sort of maybe can relate to it a little more, their shock. And you sometimes, I think there's a lot of sentiment of helplessness, and I think that people are going to be thinking, well, I'd like to go out there, but what happens if these people think that I'm a Russian spy? What happens if these people are actually a gang? How do you know who's on whose side? And it all sounds pretty great. I'll get a gun, and what happens if I get a gun and stand next to someone's property and they come out and hit me over the head with a broom, telling me to go away because I'm only going to attract in a Russian airstrike, or they don't want people, antagonizing the wrath of the Russian army. And you've got this sort of dilemma of, what people can do. And I think it seems quite easy to sort of think, well, I'll just go out and run off into the woods and, like a French partisan. And I don't think that it's, it's as simple as that. And I think that, I'm getting a sort of feeling in the reports, there's a lot of people that are sort of stuck between the two. They want to do something, but they don't really know what to do, feeling helpless. And to some extent, the dawning realization that their building could just be destroyed, that they might be taken out with a rocket strike tomorrow. And just things like, so I don't want to get too sort of bogged down in the sort of boo-hooing of it all. But I think these are sort of serious issues in the sense that, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be, their whole reason and rationale for existing is going to be sort of turned upside down. They're suddenly going to be thinking completely differently. Their lives are now not what they were. The things that were important 2 weeks ago are now completely irrelevant. And to some extent, they're having to face who they are and things of that nature. But also just the sort of, the concept of fear and dread, because it can take anyone. I mean, you're sitting there and, what, you're going to sort of have a good night's sleep when any sort of sound, if a cat turns a dustbin lid over, are you going to have a heart attack or a heart failure thinking that, something's happening? I mean, you can see the way that people are recording. They don't want to point their cameras directly at what they're looking at. And so there's sort of, some soldiers coming by, and the camera sort of pans down to the ground because they don't want to look at it. I mean, not that I want to cast advice or anything, but I think this is where the 360 cameras, which are quite common, will sort of help, because you don't really have to point it at anything. But that's completely an aside, but it's still an interesting point. But I think you can get the sense that you just don't trust anyone. So all of a sudden, people with guns are now really quite dangerous, and you've got people that are really dangerous walking about in the streets on all sides, and the concept of security is just it's just gone out of the window in a lot of senses, whether it's real or imagined. People that their houses were there a minute ago and then now they're not, and they don't have any choice but to sort of somehow seek some kind of assistance. But there's no government agencies left anymore, so you've got the hospital and emergency staff doing what they can, but there is no way, there's no longer someone that you can start shouting at and saying you're homeless, give me some shelter, because the government building has probably been burnt down, or things of that nature. I know a lot of people are helping each other, but this is very different. So anyway, it's difficult to talk about really, but I feel I sort of have a crack at it. I'd be playing this game if my drag feature was working. But I'll leave it at that. I'm going to put obviously some more scenarios together, but I think what I'm going to try and do is to start making them more relevant, and was before rushing through and just putting things in. So you've got the map, so we can actually sort of see Russian forces on the outskirts of Sumy prepare to enter, and so you can actually sort of consider the challenges that entails on both sides, and etc. etc. And I'll be putting a few more of these together based on the sort of resources that I pointed to. I don't intend to sort of start blogging the war or something, because it just takes up huge chunks of my time and no one reads my videos anyway. But I do have an interest in considering and following things, and I think to some extent it's it's not a wholly bad thing to do. To sort of be taking an interest in a significant world event like this. So, but obviously I don't want to make too light of it. But again, I do think that the weighting and the feeling, it should be pretty much exactly the same as it was for Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. They shouldn't be sort of pussyfooting around any differently. It seems that a lot of people have got very different emotional sets for this particular thing as they did before. I think what Twitter was alive with before was more sort of the action shots. I think Twitter seems to have its own sort of preset of unless you're sort of sitting there telling everyone how your heart is bleeding for these people, then you are Satan. You get this sort of clear sort of sense that is the only sort of opinion to have, and that's why I sort of watched that girl die quite deliberately, because I saw the video and it did sort of strike me that that is such an unfair thing to happen, but it's happening across Syria, it's happening across Iraq, again and again. And I think that when they start sort of portioning blame, I think that you've got to sort of, I don't know, I don't have an opinion, or I don't want to say this is this and that is that, but I do feel that this is basically the breakdown. This is the extension of politics. War is the extension of politics. I don't think that Putin wants to do this or wants to do that. He did whatever he's doing. I don't know what his negotiations are all about, but obviously they failed. So the president of the Ukraine, who comes across as vitriolic and stoic and heroic, he failed, and his government failed to come to a diplomatic compromise with Putin maybe it wasn't their fault. I don't know, because I am not party to that negotiation. I don't know what was on the agenda. I'm not about to even double guess it, but I mean, I think that to some extent you've got to look at both sides and sort of think, well, really, what compromise didn't he make? What sort of inch on this side did he not give to allow the Russians on their side to give an equal inch? Or was Putin as as inflexible as they're trying to say? Well, I mean, we've seen him operating in Syria, in Syria, and globally, and he always comes across as an irrational person. So when that little girl dies, you got to think, well, this is, it's not a single Russian's fault, and the Ukrainians are not necessarily to blame. And when it comes down to it, obviously Putin has done what he's done, but at the same time, was he forced to do that? I mean, I sort of think of this in a bit like, law enforcement. There are certain situations when people are doing things, organised crime, they're criminals and they can be doing all sorts of things inside their home, so to speak, but you can't prove it. And then at some point you've just got to use force, because no amount of negotiation is going to work. And this is basically just a very, very sort of exaggerated use of force to deal with something that they consider to be wrong. I mean, Putin has described the people in government, in power in Kiev as drug dealers. I mean, I don't think he would just say that for absolutely no reason. And I'm not suggesting that they are drug dealers, but if you use that analogy and you sort of think, well, is this what he's gone in? Is this a takedown? So when you bust into a drug dealer's house, people get injured. The police can get injured. There could be innocent parties in there. Property gets damaged, and this is just the same sort of thing at a massive national level. And so I think about it a little bit like that. I'm trying to sort of judge all these things and consider them all. But when one little video like that is quite sort of, there are other videos and people, a woman who'd had clearly one of her legs blown off and the other one was not doing so well. Obviously, lots of people just dead on the floor following airstrikes in built-up areas, presumably because there's military targets around. And that sort of stuff is happening, and it's going to continue to happen, etc., etc. But I don't know. I'm just sort of talking really, and I think I sort of lost the plot a little. But essentially, I'm going to sort of sit there and cover the bits and pieces. And I don't like to say it, but I think all we can just hope for is that it ends soon. That's the only thing that I sort of try to rationalize in my mind, that once Putin's destroyed all these military objectives, he'll just say, done it, just like the Israelis did in Lebanon. They go in there, destroy everything, and then they leave. I think that, if he does that, he'll be saving some face. I don't think that he can sit there and annex Ukraine. I don't think that's his intention, because I think that this would just be too much, to sort of to justify how long he sits in there. For example, the US forces in Afghanistan stayed in there for 20 years. After disarming the Afghan people, and I think that obviously that caused long-term problems. And again, I use the analogy of the Israeli one because it's something I was thinking about. But the Turkish units, they're constantly invading with their Operation Eagle Claws and whatnot in northern Iraq, and they go in there and they destroy a load of PKK, bases. They enter the soil of Iraq, the sovereign soil of Iraq, and they kill people, and innocent people suffer. But I think, in the sense of probably the largest security operation in history we got an unprecedented situation, and if we can hope that that is what's going to happen, it could be over soon. As soon as they're happy that they've done what they've done, and then they get out of there as quickly as they can. I've heard the date, the 4th of March. Maybe Putin will do that, and I think that if he pulls his troops out soon, and I don't think that anyone's really considering that. If he pulls his troops out soon, he can say, "I went in there. We removed the weapons, we removed their military complex, and we left." Unfortunately, some little girls died and some people got their legs blown off. A lot of buildings were destroyed. But, that's that. They can have their country back and they can start rebuilding, etc. I mean, there's not going to be any sort of acceptance anywhere. But, I think that's my hope, that is going to be a limited security operation in the sense that I've described in reference to these other ones, and not an annexation or the start of a Third World War. That seems like a suitable point to end the video, really. So I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.